Welcome, welcome. We're going to let people get their sandwiches and their soup and whatever they're doing for lunch and take their seats. We have a nice crowd coming today. I'm looking forward to this. Who cares? I look forward to everyone. Is there ever one that I don't say, I'm not looking forward to this ever? No. I always look forward to this. And it's Friday. It's the weekend. I have a comedy show tonight, if anyone is so inclined to come, in Blackwood, New Jersey at the Forum. I don't know if it's sold out, but I am looking forward to that. All right, gang. I think folks are taking their seats. I'm going to officially begin. Welcome to another exciting episode of Meet the Author. We are not at the Pyramid Club today. Obviously, we are on Zoom, but it is just as nice and just in a different way. We have some stuff coming up. Let me do some quick announcements up front. First of all, we have March 7th. Let me do this. Let me do a share screen. That way you can actually see what I'm talking about. March 7th, we have Judy Umlas. She is wonderful. She has a book called The Power of Acknowledgement. So she is actually just next Friday. So if you are free next Friday at noon, you should join us. And then our April author is Jamie Cooperstein. She's written a book called True Hospitality, and she was the concierge at the hotel in Society Hill, and she has wonderful stories about customer service from that perspective as a concierge in Society Hill. So that will also be good. May 8th, I don't have a graphic for that one, but May 8th, we have our women's panel at the Pyramid Club, and that should be up on the website very soon. So by the way, I am your host, Teresa Hummel-Krallinger, and I want to also introduce my partner in crime, our chat room ambassador, and she brings love and energy to the program, Lysandra. Lysandra, tell us about you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy Friday. I'm joining you from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania today. It is sunny, it is beautiful, it is bright. Let us know where you're joining us from. If I am not looking forward to the next Meet the Author event, which is one of my favorite activities and bright spots of the month. I am deep in someone's book reading, or also providing. My professional career is in management consulting, but I've gotten there with diverse roles, more of a lattice career path than a ladder path. But I'm excited to be here and learn about Stephen's book and share this space with you. Please feel free to connect with us after the event as well, and tune into more Meet the Author events, whether we're at the Pyramid Club or in person. Thank you.
Thanks as always, Lysandra. I value our partnership. She keeps us organized behind the scenes and also sometimes in front of the scenes. All right, I think we're ready. So this is a great book. And our author is an amazing guest who Lysandra connected me to. It's all about connections, gang. So Lysandra works with Stephen's daughter, who of course recommended him because he's wonderful and he's her dad. So Lysandra's like, hey, how about this book? I work with Stephen's daughter. I'm like, this is amazing. So then Stephen and I got on the phone. We had a chat. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's a rock star. Let me tell you a little bit about him. And then I'm going to turn the reins over to Stephen for the program. So Stephen has worked in the youth summer programming space for more than a decade. And this is really the impetus for where he got all this knowledge around Gen Z. Leading companies that have served more than 200,000 students from across the globe. This has given him a front row seat as Gen Z has come of age, first as students and then as staff and full-time employees. He is an international keynote speaker. He has been featured in Forbes, Entrepreneur Magazine, Harvard Business Review, and he has worked with Ivy League schools and professional sports teams, and is regarded by many as a generational expert. So please welcome, give a round of applause, and send love his way, Stephen Robertson. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Teresa. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here and grateful that any of you that are watching have taken the time to watch and listen. And hopefully, I can share some thoughts with you today that might inspire you and encourage you, and certainly shift some perspectives. So, if that's what you have arrived to hopefully get, then I'm going to hopefully provide that for you. I am going to share some slides. I share them primarily because I want to make sure that I don't get bored, or neither do you get bored. So hopefully they're going to be funny. They are funny in Philadelphia, which is where I'm speaking from. So they should be funny wherever you're viewing them from, but it doesn't always translate exactly. So I'm going to just take a moment, if you would give me the time to quickly share my slide deck with you, and hopefully you can see that. So I want to just give you a little bit of context as to who I am and why we're having this conversation. Teresa mentioned briefly, that I've been in this next generation space, but I've been in that space for 2.5 decades, always looking at what the next generation looks and wants and how they're going about living their lives. And that journey had me in a place where I also would, on a seasonal basis, hire close to 2,000 seasonal staff at times. And about 15 years ago on this journey, we were tracking an incredible amount of data, paying real attention to anecdotal and other data. And we noticed there was a major shift in the market, which allowed me to really lean in to get a sense of, well, what is this? Enabling us over a period of time to really scale and grow our business and be really successful. And I went on a journey that took 5 years to write a book that Teresa mentioned to you, Aliens Among Us, 10 Surprising Truths About Gen Z. And just a quick thing about Aliens Among Us. The point was, I really wanted any readers to catch that Gen Z are not just regular humans, but they're aliens. And so it was a little bit of tongue in cheek, but the idea was to set the stage for a conversation that helped people think about a generation potentially differently. By the way, if any of you are interested in writing a book, I'm not selling anything, I promise you. I have a really cool process. I wish I'd used it in the first book, but we will be using it in the second. Please reach out to me. I will share some notes with you that might inspire you in some way. So that journey has given me an opportunity to connect and weigh in from a corporate training perspective, consulting perspective, with a number of different industries, probably 20 different verticals that include not only the military and education and professional sports, but finance and education and a whole range, including talent. And what I've seen over the last number of years is that everybody is navigating the same challenges. And so today, that's the story I want to unpack with you, which obviously is a part of the story that I share in the book. So I want to begin by telling you a story to set the scene. And since Philadelphia are the new Super Bowl champions, for the next year, we are going to be celebrating that. I was just speaking in Phoenix, and they were telling me how disappointed they are with how the Philadelphia crowd behaved after winning the Super Bowl in the streets of Philadelphia. And I said, oh, it's not as bad as you think. We needed to refresh, Philadelphia anyway. So it was an upgrade. But since we're the Super Bowl champions, I want to tell you a story that is a football story. So please bear with me, because I love the story and the timing couldn't be better. In 1905, for any of you that were around at the time, that's a joke. Teddy Roosevelt was the president at the time, and he wanted to cancel the game of football. I don't know if any of you knew that, but at college football, there were 157 critical injuries and 19 deaths. Can you believe that? 19 deaths as a result of how violent football was in 1905. So he does what all good leaders do, and he gets all the coaches together and he says to them, I want you to try harder, not to let our athletes get injured or killed. Well, I'm saying that tongue in cheek because that is not a strategy that leads to any outcomes that matter. And so as a result of nothing happening or nothing changing, what they do in 1906 is they introduce a new rule to the game of football, which I had no idea didn't exist at the time. They introduce the forward pass. Now, the story gets really good because what happens is, as they introduce this new rule, I can just imagine people in the crowd being like, that's not football. What, are you going to start to throw the ball around the place? That's just crazy. Why would anybody do that? And what happens is the first game of the 1906 season, St. Louis University is playing at home against Carroll College. They have a brand new coach whose name is Eddie Cotchams. Now imagine this. Eddie Cotchams shows up. He's all of a sudden got this new rule, but he also has a quarterback whose name is Bradbury Robinson, not Robertson like me, Robinson, completely different clan. Bradbury Robinson has never thrown a ball in a football game before because you weren't allowed to. Well, they show up at the stadium, brand new coach, quarterback who's never thrown a ball before. They have the ball, St. Louis University, and the first play of the game, Eddie Cotchins calls a forward pass. So Bradbury drops back and he throws the ball and it lands with a thud on the ground. Well, the trick was they were so not interested in this new rule that when they introduced it, they said, if you have an incomplete pass, it's an immediate turnover. Now, for any of you that don't know how football works, which I'm hoping you all do, that is not how it works today. We have 3 or sometimes 4 tries to get it right. First play of the game, St. Louis University gives the ball to Carroll College. At that point, I can imagine the crowd. Is it too soon to fire this coach? Brand new coach, first game, first play. Well, it didn't take long. They get the ball back. Second play of the game for St. Louis. Can you believe it? Eddie Cotchams calls a forward pass. But this time, when Bradbury throws the ball, a gentleman by the name of Jack Schneider catches the ball, runs into the end zone for the first completed pass and the first completed pass for a touchdown in football. That's not the good part. The good part is this. They go on to win the game 22-0. Their season is undefeated, 11-0. And what I want you to hear is this. They outscore their opponents 407-11. And the whole precursor, 407-11. Think about that for a moment. Not one coach that they played against at any point during that season thought maybe there is another way to play this game. 407-11. A change in perspective always precedes a change in behavior or attitude, which is what I spend a lot of time trying to show us, that it is time to shift perspective. Please do not believe everything that you think. And one of the wisest quotes I've ever heard was, what we know has a tendency to keep us from what we need to know. So that's the perspective shift story. Let's dive into why this really matters. We have a generation, Gen Z, and we have never, ever had as much data about a generation as we have about Gen Z. The most compelling data is this. This is the first generation, and I'm going to show you the generations. This is the first generation that's behavior is global, not based on who they are and where they live. So for the first time in recorded human history, people around the globe of this generation behave the same in the bulk of the categories that data tracks. 52% of the world's population is under the age of 30. 65% of the students that are currently in 7th grade are going to work in jobs that don't yet exist. I want you to see that we're dealing with a generation that are navigating things that never have been navigated before. Let me show you just what generations have existed and what generations do currently exist. We start off with the 10 retroactive generations. These are them. It starts in 1450 and up to 1900. All these generations had really been applied retroactively when scholars and historians have looked at what happened during that generation. And so there were 10 generations, none of which should be alive today. historically speaking, and some of those are very much American-based versus global. But the generations I want to unpack with you is there are 7, truly 8 generations that are alive today. And it starts off with the greatest generation, and they are between about 98 and 122. Now, what I want to show you about these generations is not just who they are and where they fit into the journey, but that there are a number of factors that impacted their lives, the way they lived their lives on a daily basis, which changed the way that they behaved, what they valued, how they communicated and engaged with each other. That's the point I want you to see. So for the greatest generation, this gentleman was alive at a time where there were no cars. He was alive at a time where there was no telephone or radio. And then all of a sudden, the telephone and the radio shows up. Can you think for a moment how that would change the way you live life on a daily basis? Generation that comes after them is the silent generation. And at least in the west of the country, the Hoover Dam shows up, and we bring electricity to people that have never had electricity. Again, look at it through the lens of how does that change everything about how they live their lives. We have the boomers next, and the number that you see on the screen is the age that they would be now, between 58 and 77. The boomers, listen to this. The microwave and the TV show up, and all of a sudden life is different. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine no TV, no microwave. What goes on in the house? And imagine when it shows up. By the way, Percy Spencer invented the microwave, and he was working for a company at the time, and they gave him a $2 bonus. Wow. How about that? Then we have possibly the greatest generation ever. That's me, Gen X. The PC comes home for Gen X. In other words, we used to have it in buildings that took up buildings, and all of a sudden now technology has moved to the degree that we can actually have a PC at home. I don't know if any of you remember the Palm Pilot, but that was one of the things that we celebrated. I don't know what it could do, but it was awesome. And the PC comes home. Then we have millennials between about 30 and 43. And for millennials, what really changed the way life was lived was the internet. But I'm showing you a picture of them with the cell phone, because the cell phone actually, at this point, was a toy. There's actually a book written about millennials called The Selfie Generation. And they used the cell phone as a toy and took selfies. Today, the cell phone is a tool that every single one of us use. So that journey from toy to tool is a thing that we see in a lot of technology. After millennials, 30 and under, for the purpose of this conversation, between about 13 and 30, is Gen Z. There is an alien, and look at the parents, right? Come on, that's supposed to be funny as well. Gen Z, the smartphone changes their world. And then we have Alpha generation, and AI changes their world. And this year, depending on what sources you listen to, we have the start of Beta generation. So they are currently at the oldest, almost 2 months old if they were born in January. That's the journey. And all I wanted you to see about this generation is that they didn't wake up with an attitude and start to behave differently. There are a number of factors that change the way they live on a day-to-day basis. Gallup, for those of you know that what the research at Gallup does, they say the following, that if we are waiting for this generation, meaning Gen Z and Alpha generation, to start to behave like the older generation, we are waiting in vain, because it's never going to happen. The data is validating the fact that they will never behave like us. And I'm going to show you why that is the case. But why it's important to say that is because every generation from millennials and older have waited for the younger generation to snap out of a phase and to start behaving like they behave. Does that make sense? And here we have this generation that behaves in a certain way, and at a certain point in time, they kind of snap out of this phase and behave like the older generation. So the millennials and older can be forgiven for thinking that the younger generations will snap out of it, snap out of a phase and start behaving like them. The data shows that's not going to happen. So let me unpack the data with you. The data is compelling and honestly quite exciting. The first thing I want to explain to you is something called the perfect storm. So there's 4 components of the perfect storm that I'm going to explain to you. And these have impacted Gen Z so significantly. That's why I get to call them aliens. And I'll unpack that with as we go. None of you will be surprised that technology is the first. Technology is such a powerful and important part of what's going on. And I'll explain to you really briefly the incredible speed at which technology is changing, especially now, is what has caused such a ripple effect. If you think about the first gentleman I showed you standing between the 2 cars, he was 101 at the time of that photo. For the most of his life, nothing really changed. The latter part of his life, the latter 20 to 30 years, things changed at a rate that it was almost impossible to keep up with. And if you look at what's on the screen, the airline took 68 years to get 50 million users. Pokemon Go, which was in 2016, 19 days to get 50 million users. And if any of you are gamers, Call of Duty in 2019, because there's new versions of it already, Call of Duty in 2019 got 100 million users in 7 days. What I'm showing you is the rate at which technology is increasing. And there is a doubling rate. It's called Moore's Law. So Moore's Law states that every 2 years, the number of transistors on a chip doubled. You don't need to know that. What you do need to know is that Moore's Law has been accurate for the last 50 years. And Moore's Law has allowed this, the cell phone, to work. And because of Moore's Law being correct, we have the ability to use this to call an Uber. If the technology didn't grow to the degree that it's grown, we wouldn't currently be able to do that. And so what I want you to see is, according to Moore's Law, we should be at 140 billion transistors on a chip. Now, if you don't understand the numbers, 1 million seconds is 11 days and 8 hours. 1 billion seconds is 31 years and months. So I want you to see the difference between 1 million and 1 billion. Well, we're supposed to be at 140 billion transistors on a chip. NVIDIA released a chip called Blackwell in September this past year, which had 208 billion transistors on a chip. Why does this matter? The speed at which technology is increasing is so significant that it impacts and changes our life on a day-to-day basis. So technology has a major impact on how we are growing up, communicating what we value, and how we live our lives on a day-to-day basis. The second of the 4 factors that I call a perfect storm is something called world news. Now, you might think this is strange, but world news has got a really, really important part to play in this journey. I grew up convinced I was going to die in quicksand. Anybody? Come on. All the shows, I was convinced, don't let me go outside because I will die in quicksand. This last July, I was in Portland, Maine. And I'm not sure if any of you are aware, but they found quicksand on the beach in Portland, Maine in July of 2024. Most of you, I actually have not come across anybody that knew that. I knew it because I was actually in Maine when they found it. And the reason most people don't know about it is because nobody died. So let me explain to you what I mean. There is a bias, a syndrome. It's a cognitive bias called mean world syndrome, which was studied in the 1970s. And what mean world syndrome said was, the more violent television you watch, the more irrationally fearful you are of the world outside. So in 1970, when they did the study, one of the shows they used in the study was a show called Bonanza. Now, I'm not sure if any of you know Bonanza, but it was a Western show. And if you think that was violent television, look at what we see today. Everything today is mean world syndrome based. So in 1980, 10 years later, Ted Turner started on the 1st of June, CNN, 24-hour news. And that's when news moved from news to entertainment, 24 hours a day. And as soon as it moved from news to entertainment, there's only 2 things that sell: humor and horror. Now, you could argue there's probably 1 or 2 others, but those are the 2 main things that sell. And if you watch the news today, which we get 24/7 on any stream or feed that we're plugged into, it is horror, 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 meaning mean world syndrome, a cognitive bias which makes you irrationally fearful of the world outside, is alive and well with all of us today. The third one is social media. And again, shouldn't come as a surprise. The only thing I want you to see about social media is it's one of the powerful ways we catch data. It is one of the powerful ways we communicate. We also are already seeing in this young lady who's 2 years old that her behavior has been modified by social media. I'll give you a moment to see the video so that you don't have to listen to me. Social media is not going anywhere. It might convert or iterate into something different. But the point is that it is the third of 4 things that have significantly impacted this next generation. I'm going to show you it's actually impacted all of us dramatically too. There are both good pros and cons to social media, just like if you take any medication, side effects. The last one of the 4 is leadership and parenting. And I want you to recognize that it's not just about what's happened in the workforce. It's also what's going on at home. And what we've seen is the pendulum has swung from micromanaging and overmanaging to no management at all. And of course, you're going to find someone in every part of that journey. But the most healthy situation is to be in the middle, the right time to manage, the right time to let people discover. Well, predominantly, we're in the place now where it's free reign and figure it out for yourself. And we are reaping the consequences or seeing the outcomes of those, not only at home, but we're certainly seeing them in the workforce as well. Parenting leaderships, those 4 things have created what I call the perfect storm. So if you don't remember anything of this conversation, remember what I'm about to tell you. This is good. Write it down. The analogy I want you to catch is an analogy of paint, but also an analogy of a lens which we look through. So if you are 30 and older, if you're a millennial or older, you've grown up in this analogy as a blue person. You've got a blue lens at which you have looked at the world through. And this blue lens has served you really, really well because you have seen things that work. You have learned, you have legacy, wisdom, knowledge, and experience. And so you have some kind of a database of what life looks like, what works, what doesn't work. You have also seen every generation come up and at some point start to behave like the older generation, wherein you can give them wisdom, knowledge, and information and help them through the journey. That's the blue generation. And as a result of our lived experience, we have this blue lens. And when we look at a problem, we look at a conversation, we look at anything really, we look at it through this blue lens. The perfect storm, I just explained to you those 4 components. There are more, but those are the 4 key components. That is yellow. And in this analogy, it's yellow paint. And so what we do or imagine is that we have this bucket of yellow paint that is being poured over the world. And as slowly as it gets poured over the world and starts to mix with the blue world, we know what happens when you get blue and yellow, it turns to green. Now, what's important about this analogy is as follows. When you add yellow to blue and it starts to turn into green, you can't move back to blue. So what I want you to recognize, and I'm going to show you a way how this is working, is that we are living in a time like we've never lived before, by the way, where the world is going from a blue world to a green world, and it will never go back to a blue world. What does that mean? That means that there are a number of processes and practices and things we are used to that have always worked that are no longer going to be as effective, and in some cases not even work anymore. How hard is that to process? Very. You have to recognize that if you don't start to see that we're on a journey from a blue world to a green world, you will not be able to adjust. 407 to 11. The second thing I want you to recognize is that Gen Z, Alpha generation, and Beta generation, those of them that are alive already, have never, ever lived at a time where they were blue. They have only ever lived in a time where they were green. In other words, those factors I just explained to you impacted their lives from day one to such a degree that they have not experienced what we lived in and through in the blue world, which is why I jokingly call them aliens, because they do not have the same lens to view relationships, communication, what we value, how we live life as the previous generations. By the way, Genius moment right here. Aliens are green. Green world, aliens are green. You see the whole thing, right? I hope you see that. Let me show you one way that the world is green. You'll all recognize what this looks like and feels like. And there are between 14 and 20 concepts like this, where we unpack and show you ideas or concepts of how the world is moving from a blue world to a green world. For the sake of time today and for the sake of your attention, I'm just going to share one, and I know most of us will really resonate with this. So I'm in middle school a number of years ago, and we get a knock on the door. I heard a comedian, wasn't Teresa, but I heard a comedian say something like, there was a day back in the day where when somebody knocked on the door, the whole family comes to the front door. Who could this be? And it was a true story. When this person knocked on our door, my mother and father, my two sisters and I all run to the door, because who could be visiting us? They open the door and there's a gentleman standing there, and he has in his hand volume A of World Book. Come on in. My parents say, sit down, sit down. Today, when somebody rings the doorbell, we're like, who could that be? Turn off the lights. We're not, well, why is someone at my door, right? So anyway, we invite Mr. World Book in, and he sits down and he shows us World Book. And I'm like, oh, this is the best thing ever. Can we buy this, Mom? Can we buy this, Dad? No. It costs $1 million. We can't afford it. Well, he leaves volume A with us as he goes, and I can't wait for my teacher to give me an assignment out of volume A. Well, imagine if she gives me Bitcoin. Well, it turns out that Bitcoin wasn't around at the time, certainly wasn't in volume B. This was a time, I want you to recognize, where the blue people owned everything. There was a time where we would buy albums or CDs or VHS cassette tapes. I'm guilty of having purchased a few VHS cassette tapes that came out of the Disney vault for a short moment. And if you buy Aladdin today, you will be able to own this priceless treasure forever. I'm sure I have some right here in my office. I have nothing to play them on. That was a time where we owned everything. Even on this thing, my cell phone, there was a time where I would buy an album and I would own an album. Then they realized, Steve, he doesn't get it. He doesn't even know all the songs. Why don't we just sell him one song instead of for $15 or $14.99 for the album? We'll sell him one song for 99 cents. And I started to buy one song at a time. Well, today, that is no longer our truth. You see, today I don't own one song. In fact, I have access to every song ever sung for $20 a month. You see, the difference between the blue and the green world is we have moved from a world of ownership to a world of subscription. And that is deeply meaningful. Let me give you a quick example. As you look at the screen right now, I subscribe to every single one of those except Stars, for whatever reason. And I remember when I cut the cable, I was like, I'm going to save $1 million. I'm going to be wealthy. Well, I think I have less money than before. So about 3 months ago, I said to my wife, whose name is Colleen, darling, I'm going to unsubscribe from Netflix. Well, she didn't really care. But I said to her, over the last 8 months, we have probably not watched one thing on Netflix. And she agreed. And when we do go to watch something on Netflix, some of you might be able to know what I'm talking about right here. We'd spend 45 minutes looking and they're like, let's just go to bed, right? Any of you experienced that? So here I unsubscribe from Netflix. And when I ask an audience like this, do any of you think I'm a fool for unsubscribing from Netflix? Not one person says you're a fool. If you're not watching it, why would you pay and stay subscribed? Then I say, who thinks I'm a fool for waiting for 8 months to unsubscribe? And everybody says you're a fool. You should have unsubscribed a lot earlier. Well, what I want you to see about this world that's a subscription-based world is it goes to relationships, it goes to employees, it goes to every component of our world that we live in. You see, if Netflix is not compelling to keep my attention to give me authentic value, I will unsubscribe. And in many cases, the salary we pay people is just a subscription. And so what we start to see is that workforces, businesses, and companies have realized that there has to be an authentic value outside of just the job in order to keep employees subscribed. And when they're subscribed, they're engaged, and that impacts a whole lot of things. The green world, the subscription model, is just one example of how the world has turned green. There are actually a number of quotes that we will live in a time where we'll own nothing and be happy. Now, that isn't a big brother, big state comment. It's a comment about the ability to pay for what you want when you want it and not when you don't. Subscribe when you want to, not when you don't. And this also speaks about how important it is to be compelling and have meaningful relationships. Remember, the TikTok, Instagram, YouTube world we live in is very compelling. So if we are going to be meaningful in terms of leading in any way or engaging in any way, we have to understand that's the ballpark we're playing in, whether we like it or not. The blue world wasn't necessarily like it. My father got a gold watch for working at Siemens for 50 years. If he was alive today, he'd be like, oh, these young people are not loyal. Everything has shifted. It is now, give me a reason to be loyal, give me an authentic reason and a value, show me why it is important for me to stay subscribed to what you have to say, Steve, and I will. But if there is no value, I will leave. I have a close friend who's really high up in Netflix. The number one thing Netflix has to do, the number one thing they have to do is retain subscribers, not create new programming, retain subscribers. Well, how do you do that? Possibly by creating new programming. So that's just one way to show you how the world has gone green. I want to also show you that there are 4 muscles that are very weak in the green world. Now, let me give you some clarity on that. This generation in particular has these muscles that are weak. And I want you to recognize that not one Gen Z alpha generation has weak muscles because they're too lazy to go to the gym. They have weak muscles because the green world doesn't require these muscles to be exercised in the same way as the blue world required these muscles to be exercised. I also told you that the world is turning green. And by the way, all of us are slowly turning green, which means we are exercising these muscles less and less. So the first muscle that is weak, and there's 4 of them, as I said, is problem solving. I don't know if you've seen that, if you're aware of that. Now that you are, pay attention, and you'll see, generally speaking, how weak the green world is at solving problems. Now, there's a bunch of reasons for that. And one example I can give you is that when you look at what the military is doing, the military has moved to not only assessing for problem solving, but to training to problem solve more than they've ever had to before. A whole lot of reasons. The second one is communication. And I want you to know that 35% of Gen Z's communication is digital. They're a digital first generation, but they also have spent 40% less in-person time with friends compared to millennials. So communication is something that's shifted dramatically. And the main thing that's changed is context. If any of you grew up watching Seinfeld and you use that as context in a conversation today, there's a generation that has never watched Seinfeld, which means a joke from Seinfeld, whether it was appropriate or not, would not even be translated. So communication, very big, very weak muscle, and that has to really be worked on. The third of the 4 is perseverance. And perseverance is not the same as problem solving, but often goes hand in hand. And technology has helped us solve problems without learning the valuable journey along the way. I told you a little earlier that 65% of the students in 7th grade are going to work in jobs that don't exist. These 4 muscles are what's going to make them successful tomorrow. The 4th of the 4 muscles is, believe it or not, gratitude. And how gratitude works is important to see because gratitude focuses on what you have. Everything we have to do around marketing focuses on what we don't have. When you focus on what you don't have, what you will see show up a lot is people that are highly offended and offendable. When you have people that focus on what they do have, gratitude tends to be really high. And that comes with generations, depending on what generations and countries are going through. But currently where we are, we're in a space of really highly offendable people and very low gratitude, which kind of go hand in hand. Those four muscles are really, really weak. I do want to share with you one muscle that's strong, and every single one of you are green in this space. One strong muscle. I'm not sure if any of you have seen the research on attention span, but the data says that millennials have a 12-second attention span. Fantastic. Good job, by the way, millennials. Make sure you put that in your resume. 12-second attention span. Then when they look at Gen Z, they say that Gen Z has an 8-second attention span. The data also, which is a little bit funky, by the way, say that a goldfish has a 9-second attention span. Well, I want you to know, I try to hire goldfish, they don't show up either. So that part didn't work. But I want you to see that this attention span is actually a fallacy. What is real is something called an 8-second filter. And every single one of you on this call today have an 8-second filter. When you look at what is compelling, what is going to catch my attention, what am I going to pay attention to, that you allow through your 8-second filter. When you consider the amount of information and the number of people that are vying for your attention on a daily basis, you recognize that if you didn't filter that, there is no way that you could keep your head on and stay focused. You could never process everything that is required of you to process on a daily basis. So what Gen Z have done and what the other generations have already done is learn to filter and only allow through their filter what they value, which is why being compelling and authentic and the subscription model, understanding that, is so important. Because if you want to meaningfully lead anybody, if you can't get through their filter, the ability to lead them is dramatically less. The scary thing is that only what's in your filter will you process, which means if you only put sourdough bread through your filter, that's all you will see. Understanding that's important. It's based on perceived value and it's based on authentic value. 8-second filter. Every single one of you, if I gave you a break right now, would scroll through your emails and look at one, skip one, look at one, skip one, or your texts. That's an example of an 8-second filter. We very quickly decide what we want to pay attention to. The beautiful thing, which is why it's different from an attention span, is that when Gen Z or any green humans, which includes some older ones these days, see something that they value, they will deep dive. So it's not a case of keeping someone's attention. It's a case of, is there value for me to pay attention to this? And when people do, they really deep dive. I'm going to close with this, and it'll take us a minute, but I want to show you the DNA of leadership, and I want to show you what all of this research has taught us. I want to show you how it plays out, and this is data that speaks to the next generation. It's data that about Gen Z that has shifted everything we've done from a business perspective. I want to just say this, that our delight and surprise was that as we were working with the next generation, Gen Z, with this model I'm about to show you, we realized it also, unexpectedly, brought the best results out of every generation that was in the workforce. And there's up to 5 generations in the workforce right now. So what we discovered with Gen Z, we were delighted and surprised to see that it really brought the best out of every generation. So it's a leadership model that transcends generations. And the truth is, it's a leadership model that's been in place for a long time. This is the DNA of leadership. And we always look at growing our businesses and growing our humans. But what I want to do is I want to start at the bottom, and I want to explain very quickly to you what this DNA model looks like, or why, or how it works. You see, we have a call back to relationship. We are, as humans, wired to make connections and build relationships. Introvert, extrovert, that's not the point. We are wired to build relationships. I don't know if this is true. There's data that says the cruelest thing today we can do is put somebody in solitary confinement for an extended period of time. I don't know if that's true. Psychologists believe it is. Why? Because we need that human connection. You see, so relationship is something you actually have to build. It doesn't just happen. And so when you build relationship in the workplace, doesn't mean you're best friends. It doesn't mean you go out for dinner together every night. It means you truly, authentically care for the people that work with and for you. Now, when you have relationship, it grows your trust. Do you trust people? One of the easy ways to test is to see, who do you give responsibilities to and who do you give tasks to? When you give someone responsibilities, your trust for them is high. When you give them tasks, your trust generally is low. And I want you to see that relationship and trust go hand in hand as the foundation of any home and or workforce today. Now, when you have relationship and you have trust, it leads to something really cool called transparency. Now, think about it this way. The more you trust me, the stronger our relationship gets. The more strength there is in our relationship, the more trust there is. This leads to transparency. And what transparency does is this. If I don't have a very good relationship with you, or there's not a lot of trust, anything you do, I'm going to doubt your motive. So, silly example, if you showed up at a meeting and I was upset about the way you were dressed, and I said to you, oh, I can't believe you came dressed like that, one of two things would happen. One, if there's no relationship and trust, you'd go straight to HR and, how dare Steve tell me how to dress at this meeting? If we had relationship and trust, you would say, Steve, why are you saying that? And I would say, well, everybody in this meeting is a lawyer or an accountant. They all wear suits and ties. You should have dressed appropriately. And you would have said, oh, I didn't know that. Now I get it. Thank you for showing me. You see, the difference in relationship and trust gives you the ability to actually speak into someone's life and for them to receive it because they trust your motive. Transparency leads to something really awesome called accountability. And if you want to make a change in your work and or at home, if you focus on something called accountability and narrative, that's where this lies. The secret key or door is around accountability and narrative. You see, the worst thing we do today, or the thing we do the poorest, the biggest area of improvement, sorry, I said that poorly. The biggest area of improvement in every business I work with is around accountability. Clear expectations, and this is an area where we do something called upskill, where we really grow people, not just in their job, but as humans. Accountability is the key. And when you hold somebody accountable, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on in the brain. There's brain science, there's neurochemicals. It's an amazing story, but it leads to something called a narrative. And that narrative is a story that gets retold about your leadership, about your business, about how you engage with people. It's not marketing. It's a story that bubbles up naturally. And if we have time, I'll tell you one. Narrative validates your culture. Do you really do what you say? Or is that aspirational, one day you'll do it? The more you hold people accountable, the more they achieve these goals, the more you create narratives, the brain science goes with it. And that leads to people validating your real culture, which leads to engagement, which leads to recruitment, which leads to retention. It's a really beautiful story. All I want you to see about the story is this. If you understand from this brief explanation how important relationship, trust, transparency, and accountability is, it covers just about any challenge that you have to navigate from an interpersonal relationship, engagement, retention perspective. And so the focus of all our learning is to figure out, how do we do that well? How do we keep them engaged? How do we build value? How do we come across in a way that's authentic? How do we challenge them? And I don't mean them as just in Gen Z, I mean as in green humans and in blue humans. How do we challenge them, stretch them, and grow them, which releases the ability for them to achieve certain goals, which in turn releases neurochemicals, which create new neural pathways. It's so exciting. The effect you see is all based on relationship, trust, transparency, and accountability. Everything that we've discovered about this generation, everything that we've discovered, we've had an opportunity to use in a proof of concept perspective. And what we've realized is that while we have an incredible amount of data that speaks to how this generation and other generations like to engage, when we realized that relationship and trust is the foundation for you to build on, which leads to transparency, which means at this point, you can truly come alongside someone, grow them, stretch them, mentor them, challenge them. And in that is the authentic value. The story that I put together in my book tries to cover that journey and a little bit more. And I hope that if nothing else, if nothing else, you just go away from today's conversation with a different perspective on the next generation, not shaking your head thinking, this generation, but recognizing that the entire world we live in is transitioning for the first time in a significant way, and we're all becoming green humans. If you do not, you will be obsolete in a short space of time. By 2030, there's going to be so much change, it's unbelievable. But what I want you to recognize is that all that it requires is a change in perspective. And smart leaders, parents, once they have a different perspective, 407 to 11, all they need is that to then think, well, what does that mean for me and my child? What does that mean for me and my employees? What does that mean for me and the people that direct report to me and or within my business? So if you can walk away with that, I hope you will see an amazing change, not only in your attitude, but how you engage with people, what kind of outcomes that will bring. I hope that makes sense. If you want access to these slides, we can share a QR code for you to get access to them. And then I'll open it up to questions and or comments and or feedback from anybody, should they have any.
Hey, Stephen, holy cow. I took a ton of notes and I read the book and I took a ton of notes. I know we have some questions for you. Lysandra, I saw a couple questions go by. Do you want to jump in and share a couple of the questions we got?
Yes, I am trying to find Michelle had a question. I'm looking for where it was because I was trying to keep it
Oh,
pinned.
I have a question. If and once you find it, jump in. So my question, selfishly, because I work with leaders and organizations, and I want to kind of harvest your wisdom here. So a lot of companies are struggling with engagement and loyalty from younger workers. So what do you have specific advice, things that you could tell leaders that they could do to create a workplace where Gen Z would thrive, where a Gen Z would want to keep their subscription,
I
right?
love the question. Teresa, 100%. It sounds so simple, but just about every organization we work with, we start with something really simple. And I'll give you a quick analogy. We teach people, leaders and managers, what real accountability looks like. And we do it at scale by doing it with one person at a time. So we have a
Okay.
process that we take people through that help them clear up a little bit of their schedule because everybody's workload is crazy. So we help them prioritize. There's a thing called a vision vault that we help them prioritize a little bit and create a little bit of bandwidth. And then it looks like this. When you come alongside one of your direct reports or people that you have influence over, and you build relationship with them, what you start to do is pay attention to, are there opportunities for me to stretch and grow them? Are there opportunities for me to challenge them? And I'll give you a quick example. I met with a group of CEOs in just a week ago, and we had this similar conversation, and they asked the same question. So I said to them, what I want you to do is just write down one bucket list thing, something that you've always dreamed about doing but never done. So they go around and they write this down. And I ask a number of people, okay, well, what is your bucket list idea? One gentleman said, I want to learn to play the guitar. So as a leader, what I'm listening for is there an opportunity for me to hold you accountable? Because if I can be a part of you doing something that is meaningful and valuable, we release dopamine, a number of other neural transmitters, and we create new neural pathways, which, by the way, unearned dopamine is really dangerous. But anyway, So we grabbed this gentleman and I said to him, do you really, really want to play the guitar? I've always wanted to play the guitar. So here's what leadership looks like. Authentic and real. Well, if you really, really want to play the guitar, how long do you think it'll take you to learn? Well, forever. Yes, because it'll take you forever to learn. Not a good goal, right? So I said, okay. So we're in a 3-hour meeting. I said to him, there were 15 people in the meeting. I said, would 14 of you be open to holding him accountable to playing the guitar? And of course, they say yes. So I said, okay, so hop on Amazon right now and buy a guitar. If you don't like it, you can send it back. It's Amazon. He looks at me and he's like, oh, okay. He buys a guitar. And I said, when we have a break, here's what I want you to do. I want you to call around hop online, find a place, call around and see who will give you lessons and book a lesson. Would you be open to doing that? I'll do that. Next thing, when we came back after the break, I said, did you do that? Yes. I said, okay, this group that I'm talking about meets every month. So I said, how about in 2 months' time, instead of learning to play the guitar and being an expert like Eric Clapton, you can play one song and come and play it for this group in 2 months' time. Yes. You see, those little steps of holding people accountable are going to get him to do something he's always dreamed about, but would never have done had we not. So from a leadership perspective, all I'm looking for is a step to challenge you, to grow you, to hold you accountable. And when you accomplish what you wanted to accomplish, you become a different human being because you never have done it. And once we start with something, because you can do that in a personal sense, if your employee relationship or your relationship allows. Once you've practiced that a little bit, you can then do it in the workforce across just about anything you can imagine. It's that holding people accountable, challenging them, stretching them to do something. And when we do that, the outcomes are incredible.
Wow. That is really, really great advice. And I can see it in my own life with fellow friends that are coaches. And when I start to say, oh, I'd like to do, immediately, Stephen, they go into accountability mode with like, when would you like to have that done?
Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. And here it is from Michelle. I want to live in the green world. What do I need to do to adjust now?
Michelle, I feel like you're already there. It's a change. It just requires a change in perspective. It requires someone like yourself to recognize that what used to work won't continue to work. There's no guarantees. And that there's a new set of rules that are still being figured out that are now in place. If you just position yourself, your heart, to recognize that it's not just the world changing, but it's the world changing. And when the world changes, it changes every one of us as humans. That is the best way to position yourself, which is why I told the football story, because all I wanted you to recognize is a change in perspective always precedes a change in behavior. And that's all you need is a new perspective. Once you start to look around, you'll start to see the things that were never like that when you grew up, but are like that now. And we tend to be like, oh, that's not how. When you recognize that that's how the green world is, then it's very easy to adjust and adapt. All it requires is a change in perspective.
Good stuff. We are almost at the final minute. Can we do a drawing for your book, Stephen?
I would love that. I have it now ready to sign with your name, and I will mail it to you.
And it's really, I mean, you guys know it's going to be great because you've heard the talk today. It really is a very, very good book. So let's do this. I'm going to do a share screen. And I tried to get everybody who was registered on Zoom. So I didn't get everybody on Facebook, but I got all my Zoom people. So let's see. We'll just do a quick spin. I love Wheel of Names, by the way. Oh, it looks like Drew. Drew is the winner. I love Drew. Drew's a good friend of mine. So I am super happy that he won, although all of you are wonderful. So we'll make sure that you get that book. And I'm also, Stephen, I will send you who registered and attended so that if there's any kind of follow-up you want to send us, we would all be appreciative of that. Any closing thoughts?
I'll send you a link to the presentation. I promise you I won't spam you with anything, but if you'd like to see the presentation, you're welcome to do that.
It was wonderful. I might steal some of your funnies, if I'm honest with you. I'm watching, I'm like, that's a good one. That's a good one. We had some good laughs. I can't thank you enough. This has been wonderful. And you know, this is my field of work. So I'm like eating it up like butter. I'm just like, dude, so good. Your knowledge of this, you are an amazing thought leader. So we are honored to have you. Please let us know what we can do for you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Anything that we can do.
I really appreciate that. Thank you for letting me be on with you today. That's all I needed. Thank you so much.
Cool. I'm gonna quit our recording and then we begin the after party.